The rain hadn't stopped since the morning we buried Marcus. It fell in sheets as I stood at his graveside, holding our twins' hands while they sobbed for their daddy. For years old, too young to understand death, too young to know why Daddy wasn't coming home from the hospital this time. The cancer had taken him in just 6 months, aggressive and merciless, leaving me a widow at 32. Now, 3 hours after watching my husband's casket disappear into the earth, I stood on my parents' doorstep with my children, fumbling for keys that no longer worked. The lock had been changed. The brass gleamed new and mocking in the porch light. "Mom," I called out, seeing movement through the frosted glass. "The key won't work." The door opened just a crack, secured by a chain I'd never seen before. My mother's face appeared in the gap, perfectly made up as always, not a trace of grief for her son-in-law. "Emma needs your room for her home office," she said matter-of-factly. "She's starting her consulting business." I stared at her, rain dripping from my black funeral dress. "What? You heard me. We discussed this." "We discussed nothing. I buried my husband today." My voice cracked. Behind me, Lily started crying again, and Lucas clung to my leg. My father appeared behind my mother, his expression stone cold. "Widow problems aren't our problems, Sophia. You're 32. Figure it out." The door slammed shut. I stood there, unable to process what had just happened. My children, Marcus's children, were soaking wet, shivering, crying for warmth and their beds and their daddy who was never coming back. And my parents had locked us out. Today, the day I buried the love of my life. "Mommy, I'm cold," Lily whimpered. "I know, baby. I know." I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. Dead. Of course. I'd forgotten to charge it in the chaos of funeral preparations. I picked up Lucas, grabbed Lily's hand, and stumbled back to my car. At least we had somewhere dry to sit while I figured out what to do. The 3 of us huddled in the back seat, my children curled against me like wet puppies. Their little bodies shook with cold and grief. That's when I saw it through the car window, Emma's BMW pulling into the driveway. My younger sister, the golden child, the one who'd never struggled a day in her life. She got out carrying shopping bags from high-end stores, practically skipping to the door despite the rain. Mom opened it wide for her, no chain, no questions. They hugged. They laughed. Emma turned and saw us in the car. For a moment, our eyes met. Then she shrugged and went inside. I drove to the only place I could think of, the 24-hour diner where Marcus and I had our first date. The waitress, Donna, took one look at us and ushered us to a corner booth. She brought hot chocolate for the kids and coffee for me without asking. "Honey, what happened?" she asked gently, noticing our funeral clothes. "We buried their father today," I whispered. "And my parents, they changed the locks. Said my sister needs my room for an office." Donna's face went through several expressions before landing on fury. "Those bastards," she muttered, then louder. "You stay right here. Don't you move." She returned with the manager, Tom, who I learned had also lost his spouse young. Within an hour, they'd pooled together with the night shift staff, people who knew struggle, who knew loss, and paid for a motel room for us for the week. Donna gave me $60 from her tips. "For food," she said firmly, refusing my protests. That night, as my children finally slept in the lumpy motel bed, I sat by the window and made a promise to Marcus's memory. I would rise from this. And when I did, I would show my parents exactly what widow problems looked like. The next morning, I went to war. First stop, Marcus's life insurance company. He'd been meticulous about paperwork, even as cancer ravaged his body. The policy was worth more than I'd realized. He'd increased it after the diagnosis, pouring every penny he could into securing our future. Second stop, a lawyer. Turns out, illegally evicting someone, especially with minor children, especially on the day of a funeral, that was criminal. The lawyer took my case on contingency after hearing the story. Third stop, my childhood home with a police escort. My mother's face when she saw the officers was almost worth everything. "What is this?" she sputtered. "Illegal eviction, ma'am," the officer said calmly. "Your daughter has established residency here. You can't just change the locks, especially with minor children involved." I retrieved our belongings while my parents watched, fuming. Emma stood in the doorway of what had been my room, now painted a different color, my furniture already replaced with her office setup. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I have clients coming. Should have thought of that before you stole a widow's room," I replied, grabbing my children's toys, Marcus's pictures, our clothes. "You're being dramatic," Mom hissed. "We did you a favor." You need to learn independence. I stopped and looked at her. Really looked at her. I just watched my husband die slowly for 6 months. I held him as he took his last breath. I planned his funeral alone while caring for 2 grieving toddlers. And you think I need to learn independence? The silence was deafening. We left and never looked back. But I wasn't done. Not even close. See, what my family didn't know was that Marcus had been a tech developer. A very good one. And in his final weeks, when he could still type, he'd built something. A project he called For Sophia. It was a childcare app that connected single parents with verified, affordable babysitters in real time. He'd written the code, done the framework, even started the patent process. Finish it, he'd whispered one of his last nights. It's your empire. Build it. So I did. Living in that motel, then a small apartment, I threw myself into completing Marcus's vision. I used part of the life insurance to hire developers to polish the code. I pitched to investors during the day and held my crying children at night. I was fueled by grief, rage, and the memory of standing in the rain while my parents chose my sister's convenience over their grandchildren's shelter. The app launched 8 months after Marcus died. Safe Nest, affordable childcare for single parents by single parents. It exploded. Turns out there were thousands of parents like me, struggling to work while caring for grieving or young children alone. We filled a gap no one else had noticed. Year 1, 50,000 users. Year 2, national expansion. Year 3, acquisition offers I turned down. Emma's consulting business, meanwhile, failed within 6 months. Turns out, clients don't appreciate consultants who brag about stealing widows' rooms. Someone, definitely not me, had made sure her potential clients knew exactly what kind of person they were hiring. Social media has a long memory. The best part came 3 years after that rainy night. My parents, now in their 70s, reached out. Mom had fallen, needed care. Emma couldn't help. She was broke, living with her latest boyfriend. Dad's pension wasn't enough for in-home care. They asked to meet at a restaurant. I brought my children, now 7, thriving despite their early loss. We sat across from the people who'd locked us out on the worst day of our lives. We need help, Mom said without preamble. Interesting, I replied. I needed help once too. Remember? That was different, Dad started. You're right. I cut him off. I was a young widow with 2 traumatized toddlers who'd just buried their father. You're just old and poor. Completely different. We're your parents. Mom's voice shook. Were, I corrected. You were my parents. Until you looked at your grandchildren, Marcus's children, crying in the rain and told us widow problems weren't your problems. Emma arrived late, sliding into the booth with desperation written across her face. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by knockoffs. The confidence was gone too. Sophia, please, she started. I need your office space back? I asked sweetly. Sorry, someone else lives there now. A widow with 3 kids. I bought the house when Mom and Dad defaulted on the mortgage. Their faces went white. I'd purchased it through an LLC, kept it quiet. They'd been getting eviction notices from a property management company, not knowing I owned it. You bought our house? Dad whispered. My house now. And yes, I'm evicting you. Turns out widow problems can become your problems after all. Where will we go? Mom's voice was small. I pulled out a brochure and slid it across the table. Golden Years Assisted Living. It's adequate. Not luxury, but you'll have a roof. I've paid for 6 months. 6 months. Emma gasped. Then what? Then you figure it out. You're adults. Learn independence. I stood to leave, but turned back. Oh, and that rainy night? When you changed the locks. My children still have nightmares. They thought they were being punished for crying at their daddy's funeral. Lucas still asks if Grandma and Grandpa hate him because Daddy died. Mom started crying. Dad reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I would have shared everything with you, I said quietly. The success, the money, the joy of watching Marcus's dream helped thousands of families. All you had to do was open the door. Instead, you taught me that family means nothing if they'll abandon you at your lowest moment. We left them there, in that booth, with a brochure for a budget-assisted living facility and the knowledge that their cruelty had birthed an empire they'd never be part of. The kids and I went home to our new house. Not the one I'd bought from under them, but a beautiful colonial in a better neighborhood. Their rooms were filled with pictures of Marcus, toys, and the security of knowing they'd never be locked out again. That night, Lily asked, "Why don't we see Grandma and Grandpa anymore?" I pulled her close. Because sometimes, sweetheart, People show you who they really are when you need them most. And we learned that grandma and grandpa only love people who don't have problems. But everyone has problems, Lucas said wisely. Exactly, baby. Exactly. 2 months later, I heard through extended family that my parents and Emma were living in the assisted facility. Emma worked minimum wage at a call center. My parents spent their days complaining about ungrateful children. The other residents avoided them. Meanwhile, SafeNest had just passed 2 million users. Single parents across the country were finding affordable, reliable childcare. Marcus's legacy lived on, helping families stay afloat during their darkest times. Sometimes I thought about that night, standing in the rain, my children crying, my parents choosing cruelty over compassion. It should have broken me. Instead, it forged me into someone they never expected. Successful, independent, and completely free of any obligation to people who'd shown me their true faces when I needed them most. They thought widow problems weren't their problems. They were right. My problems made me unstoppable. Their problems? Well, those were no longer mine to solve. The rain still falls sometimes when I visit Marcus's grave with the kids. But now we have umbrellas, warm coats, and the absolute certainty that we'll always have a home. Not because of family, but because sometimes the family you choose, a kind waitress, a generous manager, a husband's final gift of code, is worth more than the family that chose to lock you out when you needed them most. And somewhere in a small room at Golden Years Assisted Living, my parents were learning what it felt like to need help and have doors slammed in their faces. The only difference was, I'd shown them more mercy than they'd shown me. 6 months of shelter. 6 months more than they'd given their daughter and grandchildren on the day we buried Marcus in the rain.